started. Goals for today. Our goals were to be able to put everybody in the construction industry supply chain together, from banking, accounting, developers, owners, general contractors, trade partners, the suppliers, and any other service industry that feeds the construction industry, including even financing. And what we want to do is be able to have all those different perspectives spoken about in one forum where everyone can hear and see them together. Because as a third party who doesn't necessarily work on a construction site, I have the benefit of being able to hear all those perspectives. And what I can tell you from my perspective is most are misconceptions. A lot of folks think that this person does that when they don't really do that, or this person's doing that and they don't. And it usually stems from some bad scenario that they were through, and then it kind of gets labeled. And so we're trying to make sure we can put those labels aside and at least figure out in this room, through this group, how everybody can make it better and do it better in whatever part they can control. So that's our main function for today. Couple things. We talk a lot about performance is the most important thing. In the construction world, if everybody performs, everybody gets paid. So there'll be a common theme you'll hear about that. And if everyone can think of how do I offer value first and what's in it for everybody else, then you'll find how easy it'll be for you. Those are the kind of couple themes you'll see us talk to. All right, so the first topic is going to be about inflation and supply chain. The way we're set this up is I'm going to go through the panel, and everyone's going to spend about 90 seconds giving their just general overview of where they stand in the construction chain, what they're doing, how it's impacted them, how the supply chain, what they've had to do different, where it's going to show up the most, and then more importantly, just kind of give an overview of what their impression is and things that can be done. So, couple things. My perspective, what we're seeing is trades and suppliers are having to deal with significant price increases, but so are the suppliers themselves, which then in turn comes up the chain. And obviously things don't happen in instantaneously in construction. What you bid today, you might construct a year later. So obviously we all know that, but that's been impactful. We see it as well. So terms and overall margin, the impact to the cash flow of the project, as well as the bankers and the developers that are actually financing it, okay? So I'm sure everybody might know each other, but let me do a quick introduction to everyone here on the panel. So Garrett Moss is the president of Moss Construction. We have next to him, Justin Bloom. He's the director of commercial banking at BMO Harris. We have John Riggins. John is the president of Tally Riggins Construction Company. We have Christian Litton. He's the president of Preferred Materials. We have Kyle Pacheco. He's with Lane Gorman and Trubit. They're an accounting firm. We have Daniel Kilman. He's the president of PaveCon. We have here Brian Peters with Advanced Track Equipment. He is the president, new business and supplier. And Jack Rowe. Jack is with Taylor Morrison. He is the director of land entitlement and development. Jack, we'll let you go first in this order. Testing.
About inflation, right?
Yeah, so 90-second overview, how you've seen inflation and the supply chain changes impact you. And I'll keep a quick clock, but the goal of this is just give a basic overview. You're going to have plenty of time to talk, but we're going to have a general discussion. We'll navigate for 25, 30 minutes. But I want everyone to kind of get a chance to speak and hear from each person individually.
So from my perspective, we're preparing budgets typically even before we buy the land because we're projecting whether it's feasible. And then maybe 6 months to a year later, we're incurring those costs. So oftentimes we're committing to these costs, with people like Garrett, maybe 6 months after I'm committing internally to how much I'm going to spend on utilities or whatever that portion is. And so there's a lot of time between. So I'm pretty conservative in as much as I can get away with what I think it's going to cost based on historic pricing. That's difficult when prices are seemingly, maybe a year and a half or two ago, I'm getting calls like, I can't hold this price for 3 days. But to me, that was new. So it's hard to plan in an environment like that. So we try to be as conservative as we can. But what I've seen is everything has gotten more expensive to build and develop and takes a little longer to build because the market demand is increased a lot, and the number of contractors and skilled trades has not increased the same amount to supply that labor. So everything's more expensive and takes longer. And I guess with inflation, it's been passed on to the end user, and we're seeing now, because of the Fed intentionally reversing that trend, I think it's going to trickle back down the opposite way, because we're not going to be able to sell the homes for what we did 6 months ago. And so I think there's going to be a reversing, but it might take a while.
For us, inflation and supply chain has been a big deal as far as equipment concerns are. Buying equipment is anywhere from 20 to 30, sometimes even higher percentage than what it was a year and a half ago. So that obviously poses a problem. And then getting that to the contractors is not, the rates haven't necessarily caught up there, right? And then the supply chain availability of equipment has been a challenge as well. We've had to get very aggressive with how we purchase equipment, even looking to things like Facebook Marketplace to buy equipment because our dealerships local don't have them. So we spent a lot on trucking the last year and a half or so.
I think, generally speaking, as a businessman, we all saw this coming. It was the only thing that could have happened to offset what we were seeing that the feds were doing was an increased inflation. We saw, 75 basis points 2 days ago. So I think knowing it was coming, for us, it was a shift in basically our balance sheet goals and what we intended to do with the business. We made sure we had plenty of liquidity and we were ready to deal with it, and quite frankly expected it. It's causing a ripple effect all across the spectrum, especially in the Western world, but other parts of the world, there's runaway inflation that's far worse than what we're experiencing here. But I represent a trade partner on this panel, and something that we did that was paramount, I think, was started to really drill into our culture, especially our estimating project management team, this little phrase, and we put it on the wall, wrote it on the wall, and it hasn't come down yet. It says, "We deserve to be well paid for the hard work we do." And what I meant was we were going to be as arduous as necessary to go back and get price increases on these long-term projects, and we were going to live that way. And we weren't going to take no for an answer. Obviously, we took no for an answer with our municipal work, and for that reason, our mix of work shifted away from the municipal sector, and we dove harder into the private sector. And lucky for us, we have a multitude of businesses that all have different service lines, so we could lean into some and stay away from others. But that for us, it was significant. We had severe cement shortages, obviously, with severe pipe shortages, severe conduit shortages, CapEx shortages, everything. Everything was not here and way more expensive, and we just couldn't take, we couldn't allow margin erosion to be a part of our overall schema, and so we turned a lot of projects away. We gave a lot of contracts back. If they didn't work, and we just decided that, growing for the sake of growing was not our strategy. We were going to stay 5% ahead of inflation, and that was our goal. We were able to do that, and we made it all work. But it has been a really hard time in the industry for the last 2 years for us. And we're on the other side of it. We rebuilt a business model that can function in a stressed out economy. And for that, I think there's a lesson to take away, which is, we learned a lot during this era of price fluctuation that will make us a stronger business in the future.
So from my side, I think some things that are kind of key to look at now is make sure you have price escalation clauses in your contracts, material delays clauses in your contracts. Make sure you work with the attorney to get those incorporated into your contracts. Hindsight's 2020. You didn't know that going into that, so the contracts that you had in place before you started experiencing these issues, I think transparency is key. Get in a room, have the GC, the trade partners, the developers, the banks all get in a room and show them what you priced it at when you bid the job 6, 12, 18 months ago. Show what the price is now, and show them that difference. And everyone's not here to do this for free. We're not running not-for-profit companies. Everyone wants to make sure everyone's getting paid for the work that they do. So I think those are just I think a few tips that I have on that subject.
From our side, as a concrete supplier, we've obviously faced a lot of inflation with fuel and materials. The fuel side of it, I think we've been able to mitigate with fuel surcharges. I think everyone's been pretty understanding of that. The materials has been really the challenge. It's been extremely volatile. There's a very high demand for material, historically high, and then no increase in supply. So what we're seeing is increases in price more frequently, every 6 months, or used to be every 6 months. Now we're seeing every 3 months or every 2 months, sometimes even every month. And so for us, we've had to go back to our partners and our customers, like some of the people in this room, and like you said, have some tough conversations. And again, just relay the information that we're not here to work for free, and we can't, and we have a business to run, and we have to continue to run it. So I agree 100%. Transparency has been key. Finding those good partners in your customers, finding those good partners in your suppliers, and then just being transparent and open, and that's the approach we've tried to take. It seemed to work, but yeah, like you said, it's been a tough 18, 24 months. I think it's brought a lot of us together, but it's also put a wedge in between us, and it's unfortunate, but I agree. I think we're on the other side of it, and things look good from here on out. So.
It's coming down though, right?
Any cement guys in the room?
I think the supply chain problem basically delayed our start dates on projects. So back in the day when you get awarded a project and, hey, why aren't you started yet? We need shovels in the dirt. Let's go. Now that you get awarded a project and you sit and wait for 4 months while you order steel, roofing, and hopefully you can lock your concrete prices in. But and then over the last 15, 16 months, we've seen prices increase 1% per month. So what cost $100 a foot last year costs $115 a foot, and it's just harder for these guys to make deals. And then the Fed doing what they're doing is not helping things either. Those are the main things.
So I think, kind of like Scott, I have the opportunity to have a pretty broad perspective across the industry. So if the tie didn't give it away, I'm the banker on the panel here. We are a large North American organization, and we work across the country. We have a dedicated channel into the engineering and construction verticals, so we work with a lot of subcontractors, general contractors. We also work with developers on the real estate side. So there is just a confluence of events that kind of all led into inflation, and on top of that, you had a rising interest rate environment. I think the end result is anything that you are feeling just gets stacked up all the way up to the general contractor, all the way up to the developer. And then oftentimes we've seen on the development side, the contingencies are blown, interest reserves are eradicated. So where's the extra capital coming from? It has to come from somewhere, and those become difficult conversations. So I think you all are probably doing the right things and having those difficult conversations. Transparency, communication has been a theme that's been running across here. I think that's critically important because it has to happen in every level, and there's going to be some shared pain and some shared gain, and hopefully we get to the other side of this inflation nightmare that we're in sooner than later. We'll see. The Fed's trying, but who knows? Your guess is as good as theirs at this point, from my perspective.
So much like these other guys, we're a trade partner in our project. Moss Utilities, we're early on in a lot of these projects, and what was really difficult over the last few years was the speed at which we had to communicate and how fast we had to make decisions and talk to our customers. A couple of years ago, we couldn't hold pipe pricing for 2 weeks because our supplier said you're going to pay for what it costs when it ships. Stuff completely outside of our control. Then we're going to the GC that just awarded us a project 2 weeks ago and going, hey, we can't hold our price anymore. What are you going to do? And then it's, well, we can hold it if we can ship pipe. How do we figure out how to get pipe to the job site? So all these conversations had to happen so fast. You really had to increase your communication game and then work on your relationships. And it came down to being a true partner, talking about this stuff, working it out as a team. And the last couple of years have been really hard. Prices going up every 2 weeks, not being able to get material, slowing projects down because we can't get stuff. people upset with each other and relationships hurting, but it's also opportunity for relationships to get stronger. And when we got hit with a lot of tough stuff with the war in Ukraine and gravel and sand, doubling in price overnight, we went to our partners, and they almost all of them helped us out. And then we did the same thing that Daniel did and gave some projects back that weren't a good fit, and we got stronger because of it. So I think those themes of transparency, communication, those are really important, and that's how we're going to continue to navigate the next step in the economy and make this whole process better for everybody.
So one of the things that I think I like to tell stories. I think it's easier to understand that. So I'm gonna share a story that kind of summarize a little of everything you heard here. Like Justin, we sit, and Kyle too, we sit and work with all different types of general contractors, suppliers, and GCs and subs and trade partners of all different kinds. And I'll give you a simple example of a roofing contractor that we worked with, actually here in Texas and out in West Texas. They bid a job, huge material bill, also pretty sizable labor bill. Couldn't change any of it. Otherwise, a very healthy company, someone we worked with a long time, worked to good margins, planned everything they could, but it was also a bonded project. So there was a lot of risk mitigation that they weren't allowed, they didn't have some of the same luxuries to just kick it back. Long story short, that job ended up costing them $500,000 on a business that doesn't make $500,000 a year. And so those impacts and where you can spread them to and who you communicate to and when you decide to bring that up is problematic. Now, we know that we understand that situation. We were involved with it. We had a loan on that project, and they worked through it and had other jobs, and they did the same type of things you guys are talking about here on the panel. But one of the things I want to bring up, and I think is important to think about while we're talking here, is when everyone's feeling the pain, everyone's willing to listen. And if you go back 3 years ago, in a world of construction where everybody's trying to figure out how to basically risk mitigate, no one's really going to the table thinking about how they could solve solutions, if I'm going to be candid. Everyone's thinking about how can I offload my risk. Developers trying to offload it a little bit to the bank, as much as the bank's going to give them leverage on. The bank's trying to offload it onto the credit of the developer. Developers then trying to offload it on the GC and so forth, right? So whose fault is it? It's a little everybody's fault, but it's not anyone in particular. So right now, what I would say is think about the kind of conversations you can have to actually make change and that you can do. And some of the suggestions like John brought up already here earlier about how you can get material on the job, or you can order it direct, or you can offload it to the bank. The bank doesn't have problems paying for things that are on the site. They just don't want to pay for things that are performance. So any way you can change the schedule values, you can reorganize those ways you can invoice. Let's think about some of those topics, and I just want to tell that story and offer that up, but who wants to kind of chime in a little bit as some of those thoughts and comments I had there as from their perspective?
I'll take it. I guess, so being the developer, it seems like all increases in cost ultimately trickle up to me, because we're the ultimate payer, or maybe the bank, right? Depends on the company, but so obviously I'm wary of every change order and things that I get, because I don't know. Maybe there's 3 parties, there's a supplier, there's labor group, there's the contractor and his subs, and then I'm just seeing I'm paying $100,000 more for what? The same thing? So the communication is important, and this started happening. I think I remember like in pipe. Started going up a couple years ago because of the resin plants and the Gulf Coast or something. And then it just seems to be everything that we're buying is more expensive. And so I'm skeptical about that. I don't know the reasons. So the more communication, the better, because I have to justify it up the chain of command within my company, because I don't get to ask anybody else to pay us more other than the tenant or the home buyer, the end user. And we're in an environment now where the Fed has made everything more expensive, drastically more expensive. So price is going up, and the consumer, me passing the buck to them that's over now. So we have to figure out a way to sharpen our pencils so that we can keep doing business. We still need to build homes and apartments. The fundamental demand is there, but it's just gotten more expensive. A lot of that expense is in interest now. So it's all about communication, I think, like you said.
Daniel, do you want to add anything?
You know, I think a huge element that this whole process has revealed to us is that, you know, in the past, we all did business development work with our customers. And we thought that was what we had to have to be successful. And I think what I'm seeing now is a shift where trade partners, vendors, developers, and customers are all realizing that they have to have trust. And, you know, this low bid model of take the lowest guy no matter what, the public funding model, you know, it crept into the into the private sector, and now I'm seeing it exit really fast because you're realizing that Jack doesn't have to have a tough conversation with a trade partner if he knows where that guy's coming from, and they do projects together on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. You know, like Ty Riggins, you know, doing work with the same set of subs over and over, and having trust and being able to call and have hard conversations and say, look, I need to get paid well. You need me to do well because you need me to show up and perform really well. And I need to do well, and you need to do well. And now I don't know how that speaks to the lender. Maybe you could tell us what that means to the lender. But I know from us, all of us here, except for the lender portion, we have to focus on each other, because if you look at a project from my perspective, the number one cost of my project is major material. So why would I not be catering to my vendors and try to build the strongest relationship I could with my vendors? If they're more paramount to me making money, you know, than the customer, you know, I just think we've missed that, and that's brought that up recently.
I think you bring up a good point. So from a lending perspective, the ultimate lender on the project matters, right? That's where the money's coming from. So the bank, through the developer, et cetera. The type of lending that we do is really specific to a project basis, and we're not funding the project. We're actually funding the actual person performing the work. So from our perspective, we built this loan program to basically sit in the risk with our client, meaning if they perform, they get paid. If they get paid, we can get paid. In order to do that, they have to perform. We also, part of what we figured out is if you can't perform if you don't make money. So one of the things we analyze, and if for all of you in the room probably seen our project cash flow tool and why we created that. Well, we created it candidly to start to figure out, hey, does this client make money on this project? Because if they're not going to make money, we can't really help them. All we're going to do is prolong a problem that would ultimately probably show up in the first month. We'll just kick that problem down the road. It'll show up in 4 months. That's not good for us. It's not good for them. So we created that project cash flow tool to figure out how much are the person performing this work, and if it's a trade partner or sometimes a general contractor performing a certain scope of work, are they making money? Because if we help them, can they ultimately make money, and when do they become cash flow positive? So probably 50% of the time for clients that come to us, even today and prior to this environment, we're telling clients that we can't do the loan, and the reason we can't do it is because you're not making enough money. And it's not so much that the margin isn't enough money, it's after you take retainage away, there's no free cash flow. So for example, if someone has a 20% margin, but there's 10% retainage, and they also have 10% in overhead costs just in their business, you know, insurance, basic things you have to pay, they're basically doing a job for zero cash flow. And I don't know about you guys, but zero cash flow doesn't really work anywhere. So those are the types of things that you have to consider and look at. So what we did is we put that cash flow tool out so we can analyze that, and we give it to everybody to use for free because we want people to be able to understand that when you're bidding. So it gets to your guys' point. If you're not making money or your terms aren't such that you can actually get positive cash flow, then the pain is just going to be instilled deeper into a project. So it's doing those analysis. But to your point, if you can do it in advance and then figure out where those problems are, you can now proactively go to the general contractor and say, hey, look, here's my problem. I got a supplier that needs to be paid in 30 days. It's $600,000 worth of material. I got to lock this cost in. What can we do? And the general contractor in that sense can look at it and say, okay, great, I see the problem. Let's figure out how to help it. Not, if you can't float this project yourself, then I'm not going to float it for you. So you got to have the confidence to be able to go speak that here's the problem and why, and it's okay because everyone on this panel has financing. Bank gets financing from the Fed, and everyone else gets financing from the bank. So there's nothing wrong with having financing. It's about how you articulate you're using it is more important.
So I would just add on the point that was raised earlier. Interestingly, we had a breakfast a couple months ago with a small handful of CEOs in the space, and the number one thing that came out of that breakfast in this environment in particular was the value of those existing relationships. that ability to count on those partners to execute trumps almost everything else. So no longer are you falling to the lowest common denominator, but that ability to execute and that trust in your partner becomes paramount. And then pulling it back to what does the lender think of that? Maybe I'm a little bit old school in the way that I grew up in learning how to lend, but the first C when you learn about the 5 C's of credit is character. And that to me speaks to character in a very, very meaningful way. So I think that's huge for what's going on right now. I mean, it just resonated so clearly with me that, you know, that trust and execution is worth more than you know, the lowest price. Because time can be money. I mean, you screw up on the execution side, and that lowest price might just have turned into the most expensive decision you made.
And the extra effort and work to show why you're asking, like maybe you need to bring in some extra material, use some supporting evidence. We have a client who does work for the state of Florida in a program. If you're late, which often you are because the state of Florida is very slow, there's significant liquidated damages, and it goes to this review board, which what does it do? Just delays your payment even longer, right? So it's a problem. So, but they were submitting these homes for a project, and they were getting late billed. They were getting liquidated damages each time, and they're complaining about it. And so they eventually started doing daily logs and taking pictures, and the next set they went to the DRR with, they got all approved with no liquidated damages. And the only difference is they just came with supporting evidence. It was extra work. They didn't really want to do it, but in this environment, that's what you need to do. Jack, did you want to add something?
I just kind of want to second what you guys were talking about. Like, we don't, obviously the low bid has an appeal, right? But it, maybe to the layman, maybe you think it's a low bid, but from experience, you know that it's not going to be because of delays or lack, poor performance. So that's where the relationships really come in. And that's the value that I can bring, is really just knowing the best people who can do what they do. Because it's not just, if it's an egregious difference, right, then there's only so much I can do to justify paying someone more for allegedly the same thing. But that's where the reputation comes in, and the trust over project after project together, and working with each other when times get tough, and building that.
Can anyone add from the panel, how do you assess a low bid versus a low bad bid?
Are we looking at the GC here?
No, it goes back to the relationship.
I didn't give you more.
Well, I mean, it goes back to the relationship. Dan hit on it just a second ago. The traditional, we're speaking industrial here, so, or I am. The traditional way on the industrial was design, bid, build. Hard bid, low number, best schedule, gets the job, right? And it just turns into a bloodbath the entire 8 to 12 months you're out there. And what this economic climate with materials has caused the industrial developers to do is, hey, who do I trust? Who will open the book with me and show me what they have, where, and what the trades are? Why are you not taking this low number? And just entering into a guaranteed max, cost plus guaranteed max with open book scenario, and the projects have just been way more successful, and boils down to communication and the trust.
And I think what you said there is important for, I say this a lot to trade partners, telling someone what you're going to make and why, it's okay. Like, I think too many people fall susceptible to, particularly in the trades, to putting a low bid in and feeling like that's the best value that you can bring as your price, and it's not. I think if you say, look, I'm going to make $500,000 on this, $2 million project because that's what it costs me to perform, but this is why I perform. And on the flip side, be okay with that. And you might not get the job, but if you're transparent about it and someone knows, then you never know. A lot of times the GCs I talk to, and John, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, they're happy if you make 500 because they thought you were going to make 8.
All the trade partners have ranches, But Garrett is sometimes low, but for the most part, or a lot of times he's not low, but I would rather hire him over some of the others that are low because I know he's going to perform.
Right. And performance, as we talked about in the beginning, is the number one thing, and you have to make money to perform. You have to be comfortable that you're going to make money. Anyone want to talk with that? I mean, Kyle, do you have a perspective you can offer from just margins in general, and don't speak specifically, but I mean, just maybe everyone doesn't understand what the margins are in projects, and I certainly don't. I know what they are. We see them very transparently, but I don't want to. I could speak all day, but I would love to hear from someone else.
I guess from the margin perspective, keep getting a lot of feedback. Sorry about that. GCs, a good GC is probably running 3 to 5% margin on most of their projects. Some might be a little higher, some might be a little lower, especially if they're doing a lot of hard bid jobs, public sector work.
You put it closer, it won't.
Okay. And then as far as subcontractor, they're probably 20, 25% across the board average. Some trades might be a little higher than that, some might be a little lower. But from the trade perspective, a lot of them see them as having a lot more of the risk. They're more susceptible to those overages on the work. Unless they can get a change order executed successfully, the materials increases as well. So they feel a lot of times they're taking a lot more of the risk compared to the GCs. That's typically their rationalization for having that slightly higher gross profit.
So we had HVAC mechanical contractor working on a school. They had a $3.8 million contract with a 35% margin, about an 8-month job. What typically anyone would say, I'm going to run in and do as many of those jobs as I can do, right? When everyone worked for 35%. Build the cash flow out based on terms. They had to put out $1.8 million in cash before they started to receive any monies. They were going to receive monies, but they were going to have at least to invest $1.8 million of that job into that job without really becoming cash flow positive. So we obviously can't do that loan unless they have $1.8 million. We can't lend them 50% on that project. But what's important to understand is that's why that cash flow tool is so key, because it's more important about the terms that you have, and they were paid in 75 days. If they were paid in 30, that 1.8 went down to 600, totally manageable. If they had 60-day terms with their supplier instead of 30, then they could keep 60-day terms. So you need to see how much cash you have to invest into it, because you can have a very high margin project that you'd be much happier doing at 15% with different terms, and you make out way better. So has anyone experienced that, or does these kind of conversations happen maybe in YPO groups or amongst other channels?
I think a lot of that has to do with the perfected SOV, right? You really have to look at the project, look at the schedule of values, look at the schedule on the job, and then determine exactly how to construct your unit prices. Because unit prices are irrelevant once they come in the door of your organization. You don't care. You care about project total and item by item, so you really have to think about MOH and everything you can do with your MOBs, and all that is a complicated schema that's baked into the contract documents, which is really different based on every contract you look at. But I think more people could benefit from looking at the schedule of values and determining how to create a better cash flow model based on the project schedule. A lot of people, I think, don't consider that as a mechanism for the funding on the project, cash flow of the business, and everything. Because if you perfect that on every project you have in the WIP, you'll change the cash flow drain on the whole business.
I've heard a lot of folks talk about the schedule of values as, if I negotiate that, I'm probably not going to win the bid. Is that a common theme, or is that something that you guys think should be talked more about? Meaning, I think if I understood Daniel correctly, he said that a lot of how you build your schedule of values, how you can invoice, how you can pull and retain money on a monthly basis off of the project. If you negotiate that prior to starting it, sometimes it's dictated, or oftentimes it might be dictated, how that schedule of values needs to be. And if you start to negotiate things like terms on the contract or negotiate the schedule of values, you can basically lose the project.
Then you need to fire that customer.
I think what you're saying, so I represent a developer, but basically playing GC for residential infrastructure. So, frankly, like you said, I just care how fast can it get done and how much is it going to cost. And I'm not looking at, is your mobilization fee really high? Because I'm looking at multiple bids and I'm comparing unit pricing and quantities and making sure nothing jumps off the page at me. But at the end of the day, I think what you're saying is front load the things, put more weight in your total package, right, on what you're going to complete first and can bill for first. Is that what you're saying?
Depending on the cash flow draw of the project and the way that project's going to affect your organization, yes.
Right.
You need to dial that in, otherwise it's not really front loading the project, it's just making the project work in tandem with your organization's cash needs.
Right. So my understanding of this is if your unit pricing looks a little bit weird because it's spread out in a way that makes your cash flow work for you, I don't care so much. Right? We care more about is it in my budget overall. We forecast our cash flow as well. But that component is, within reason, right, is negligible compared to the overall cost. Because I have 60 different things that I'm paying for. Your component is not going to break the deal because you charge me a little earlier for things that, because you front loaded the way that you're billing.
Justin, I was going to ask, does the bank care?
Yeah. No. Well, I guess it would, from the financing of the project perspective, so long as it still fits inside the engineering report that the bank gets based on the funding and the job's been performed per the draw schedules, the bank won't care. And I do agree. And being a lender to a subcontractor, I would agree. I mean, I think those are conversations you have to have. We have a great example of that. It was sort of an extenuating circumstance, and this also comes to where the conversation and the transparency kind of factors in, and including your lending partners into that. But we had a subcontractor working with a concrete contractor on a big project. The terms of the project got condensed. Their portion went from 7 months to 10 weeks. Obviously, that changes the cash flow that's needed to front end that. And they immediately went not just to the bank to say, help us out, which we were able to do, but also went to their GC and said, we need to change payment terms. I can't wait 45 days and take this burden on myself. Let's retool what we're talking about here. And they redid the contract.
I did say earlier we don't care about how, what you're billing for when, right? The risk for us is enough work completed so that if you get hit by a bus and I have to pay someone else to do it, is there enough money left in my budget that I haven't paid you to finish the remainder of the job? So obviously there's some give and take there, because we're assuming basically all risk because everyone can put liens on the land that we own. So we're flexible, and that's where the relationship and the history together and that trust comes in. Because if you need to front load, if your mobilization fee needs to be, a little higher than the other folks, to make it work for you, that's fine, so long as I can't pay you $1 million for a $1.1 million contract in your first bill, right? If those improvements aren't installed yet. So that's my perspective on that.
This is just a question. What percentage of developers and GC do you think are in that position and to do that? Do you think it's 50%? Is there a certain amount?
I can't speak for others, but I know how important I don't build anything. I just hire. I'm not an expert in what y'all do, so.
I think there's a big difference between what Jack does and the commercial world that these guys operate in, that he's got a little more leeway and a little more flexibility to do stuff, directly. The commercial world seems very, and this is topic number 2, we're kind of getting a little ahead of ourselves, but the commercial world is very slow, the draws are a lot slower, the whole process is a lot more involved, the bank has more inspections, Jack's operating a little more nimble. So it's important to know the difference between the types of work, So there's an advantage to doing the types of work that Jack does, and there's some stuff with commercial that's a little bit better. So just understanding the type of project you're on, how that project's going to work, who the other stakeholders are, understanding the lending, who's financing the project. Stuff that I never used to ask questions on, right? If I had trusted the GC, I was fine. Now I'm like, who's the developer? Who's the lender? How's it structured? When are we going to get our retainage? How are we going to handle clauses in the contract with material escalations? Those are all stuff that we're starting to, get better about asking. So.
I think Daniel made a good point too when he talked about service lines, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my impression of that service lines was how I do my municipal work might have a different margin, a different set of terms than how I might do Jack's work or how I might work with John on his commercial or industrial project. So you can't just spread it evenly. You got to really look at all those little aspects, and you can do jobs probably at a little lower margin and more efficiently working on Jack's project than you might be for the city of Dallas, for example.
But just going back to the inflation topic, I think the big takeaway is that everybody is dealing with it, right? And we're all in the same boat. So trying to understand that Jack can't build his projects if his budget went up 20% from last year. He's not going to be able to get the rents. The project's not going to happen, right? Or understanding a concrete supplier can't physically get the concrete to you if they don't raise their price because Martin Marietta's raising gravel prices or something. So trying to have some empathy in how everybody else is feeling the inflation and how we all need to work together to, figure it out. And it's going to take everybody to figure it out, right? It's not just going to be, nobody's trying to take advantage of the situation sitting here. It's not there has to be some trust and some, some real hard conversations and getting on one team and really having one goal.
Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about related to inflation? We got probably 3 or 4 minutes left on this topic.
I do want to say one more thing. So I think it is like you said, the companies that I work with, we're buying land. It's taking a lot of risk. There's tens of millions of dollars spent and years spent from energy and dozens of people working together before a single dollar comes back to us. It's very risky, and all we have to rely on is, data from today and a lot of times historical data. So if we can't make a deal pencil, then there is no work to be done by anybody. So nobody can make so much money that it's suddenly infeasible to do the next job because then I don't have a job. There's just the business dries up. So I don't know if we're sharpening our pencils. Everybody's trying to be as accurate as possible, so that we can continue to build things. Because the demand is there, but the Fed is making it a little wonky.
One thing I wanted to add too is you have everybody here is really the owner and leader of their business. Just because you hear what you're hearing here on this place does not mean that the project manager working for somebody might have the same impression or might take the same culture, right? And so be open to communicating. I bet you, I don't want to put anyone's words in their mouth, but I bet you everyone here would be much happier to know that if someone went to one of their project managers, superintendents, and they were transparent about a problem and they were trying to look for a solution and they got hammered, they'd probably want to know, because I doubt anybody on this team here gives that guidance to their project manager, superintendents, where a lot of trade partners might be dealing with someone in one management rung down. So I don't know, does anyone want to comment on that or how you guys handle that, making sure your teams know your culture and your thought process?
I hope Garrett would agree with me here, but yeah, it's part of our culture, period, our core values, and it's our lean construction methods. One of the tenets of lean is respect for people, and that's one of our core values. And so, yeah, if my guys are hammering our trade partners, that's not acceptable, and I want to hear about it. And Garrett and I have a pretty open and honest dialogue, and Dan's team as well. And back to the communication, when diesel jumped up to $5 a gallon overnight, Dan's team was in my office the next day saying, hey, we can't eat this. It will put us out of business. And it forced the conversation, the difficult conversation with our client that, hey, we can't eat this. It could really hurt us as well. And things started compromising, which was the first time in my career I've seen that.
Yeah, and see, that what's great about that is everybody's feeling the pain and everyone is realizing it. Where in the past you might bring that conversation up and your client might think that you're trying to pull one over on them or that you're letting someone else pull one over on you, but that's not happening anymore. So it's a real advantage, I think. And as much as pain as it is, there's some real advantages to having these conversations now. Does anyone have a question in the crowd that or something thought we would love to say?
I can. You guys have all discussed the challenges of this industry with things that have happened, the pandemic and inflation, but what I've heard is the strengthening of the relationships and the industry. Can you guys speak to that even though there's been the downside and the cost and the fact that you're not going to get talent or the supply pool isn't there to replenish what's been lost. What are some of the upsides? Because I'm hearing a lot of the upsides and positive things that have happened through these last few years.
If I'm going to go to battle with somebody, I'm going to go to battle with somebody I trust. And I would say, yeah, it's one of the positives that have come out of this, the communication and the brotherhood, if you would. I mean, let's attach each other's hip and let's go get it, right? Let's go figure out how to get through it.
I think over the first maybe 6 months of this, it was challenging. We were all kind of pointing the finger at each other more than we are now. I think now 2 years into this, we've all come to the conclusion that we all are in the same boat, and there's nothing we can do about it, and the problems aren't going away. So I don't think that, we all had a year ago we might not have all had a different opinion, but I think just through time we've all, realized it's, like I said, it's happened to all of us, and we have to band together. And to Daniel's point, I spend as much time on business development with my suppliers as I do with my customers. I think it's equally as important. I have a procurement background, and I've always taken that approach. And from a concrete supplier, when other guys weren't getting cement and they were wondering how I was getting cement, it was because I was spending a lot of time with my cement suppliers and building that relationship. So,
I think it's a great question. I had one other thing to what's been said. We see these relationships develop and the interaction between trade partners and GCs and developers, and phenomenal to watch. But out of adversity comes innovation too, right? We're seeing more and more people look towards the future. How do we become able to do more with less? How can we innovate? How can we find ways to move this forward and become more efficient as an industry? And you needn't look all that far. Countries in Europe have been dealing with labor issues much longer than we have in the U.S. So how are they doing it? What technologies are they deploying? And so we're starting to see some of that, which I think is really cool. It probably wouldn't have happened for another decade or so if we hadn't gone through what we just did.
Did someone raise their hand in the back?
I'm curious if like the change orders go through and all those costs are going up, where is that decision kind of being made at? Is that at a bank level, or is that at, when concrete prices go up and labor goes up and you did that job 12 months ago, and that project starts today, kind of where does that change order fall?
The question was if the change orders happen and that conversation's had, who ultimately is making the decision?
I mean, if in a public company, it's someone in my position, but there's probably several steps, because if it's a subcontractor of Garrett, you probably have to okay it, right, to a degree, and then it trickles up to me. And is it in budget? I mean, can I afford it? And oftentimes, it's a relationship thing, but we do want to see information backing that up. I don't want to just here's a number and I need this this much more money for the same thing. If there's a change, there's a change. When the change comes from some external factor that I didn't direct and didn't request, then I need an explanation for it. And the faster I can feel that sense of trust from like, okay, you're being open, this is what it's for. It sucks, but it is what it is. There's risk involved with real estate development, and we assume that risk, and that's it's part of the business. It's probably different for people that have a bank though, or a construction loan. I don't know.
I would say on the constructions, ultimately it results in the impact on the net size of the loan and falls back to the developer borrower anyway. The bank may be willing to increase loan to values or increase contingencies, but ultimately that's going to be a borrower decision because they're ultimately responsible for the repayment of that loan.
So I'll give you a good example. We have a multifamily developer we do a lot of work for. They're not here today, but we had to reprice 6 projects to them when the war in Ukraine caused diesel to double or triple overnight. Went back to them on all the projects. I laid out exactly where our increases came from. I showed them the cost of gravel to get to their job site. On 5 out of the 6 projects, they helped us out. They went to the developer. They explained it all to them. We got all of our escalations. There was one more project that's still lingering out there where the developer refused. No, it's your problem. They went and they said we're gonna pay you no matter what. And what I did, I said no, we're gonna half it because I can't let you take all that either, right? So I think again it comes down to just having the relationships with the key decision makers at these developers and the general contractors, but being a true team partner and trying not to let everybody else take the burden. We all have to take the burden. So, and we're all going to get through it together stronger.
I do want to add to that too. Is this working now? Hello? Is it working? I don't know if anyone can hear me. We don't want you guys to not make any money, right? We don't want to do one project and be done. We need to be profitable year after year after decade, and it's all about. Here, does it work? It's all about those relationships, right? So if I rather than maybe making less profit on one project, but you go out of business, how do I do the next one and the next one? Because there's only so many trade partners out there, and there's fewer very good ones. So we're all in this together, So I want everybody to make enough money to keep doing it and get better at what they're doing. And so we're not trying to pinch pennies here. Obviously we're dealing with other, it's investors' money. We have to spend it wisely, but part of it is we're in a long-term business. Even one project takes 3 years, so we're always looking for that future relationship, and it's nice to see okay, it's a loss for everybody. We'll try to spread it out and all bear the suffering together, but I don't think it's a good business practice to say well, tough, you take it and you're bankrupt, and good luck on your next venture, because I'm going to be calling you 6 months from now, asking you for another bid, right? So that's my take.
Next topic is really the waterfall of payment cycles in construction. So we've kind of, as Garrett said, we kind of touched on that a little bit here, but we'll jump into that. But we did set aside 10, 15 minutes right now to grab some water, take a break. Bathrooms are in the back. You got waters and everything you need here. And then we'll start right back up again quickly here at 10 after 3. Thank you very much, guys. It was a great discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to tie something together between the first topic we talked about and kind of what we all heard from that was, about this industry getting better over the last couple of years through adversity, right? And I think we all know and can look around at some amazing people in this industry. And there's tons of value in it. And so far, it's been an industry that changes really slowly. And it likes to do stuff the way it's always been done. And you're seeing that start to get challenged the last couple of years. You're seeing more partnership talk with trade partners and general contractors. You're seeing developers chime in. The teamwork stuff is really improving. But one area we're not really seeing it start to improve is how projects are financed, how cash flow works on a project. I think that's one missing piece that we want to talk about here today, is how to take that partnership that we're really making progress the last couple of years to make the industry better, how we take that to the project financing and cash flow. So Scott's going to...
Thank you, Garrett. So this topic I'm excited about. It's something we talk about all the time. Again, coming from a third-party perspective, you get to see a lot of different things from different sides. I have kind of an appreciation for everybody's perspectives and pain. But one thing I want to talk about, there's really 3 things when it comes to a construction project from my perspective. You have, I think 2 are done really well, depending on where we are in the chain of items, and 1 is usually missing. And Garrett just hit the nail on the head. It's the project cash flow. But the other 2 is, I think folks really know how to bid the work well. They have a system for the most part. It's usually pretty accurate. I think they have a construction schedule. They know the work schedule they want to keep. And if all projects were started today and done tomorrow, they'd probably be pretty close to what margin they make on it. The problem is those schedules are 6, 7 months long. They have different phases sometimes, and it's how much money goes out that I know my costs, but how much of those costs are going out and when, and how does that relate to the money that's coming in? And so I think it's key while we're having this conversation that just put an awareness out there, since we all live in the construction world. This cash flow cycle, if applied to other industries, those industries would be gone. Gone tomorrow. Think about this restaurant, for example. If restaurants took all their costs for the month, bought them all in advance or secured them, had everybody come in and eat, and invoiced everybody collectively at the end of the month and then waited for another 30 days, I mean, how many restaurants would we have? I mean, so I think it's good to give everybody some grace, and especially yourselves, that this is just a really difficult cash flow industry to manage. I mean, it's just a fact. It's not that there's nothing else like it. Nothing else has actually developed that. Now, take that one step further. I think any of us, depending on the size of your company and the projects, would probably love to take the supply costs of this restaurant, as nice as it is for a month, as opposed to the cost that you all have to manage on a monthly basis. It's a big industry too. It's big, big numbers, and there's a lot of risks, okay? So while we're having this conversation, I think it's important. And the way to mitigate that risk is your project cash flow. You have to know the free cash flow is more important than the margin. And there's so many people focused just on margin or just on markup that you really need to look at what your cash flows are on this job. And it means what amount of money am I investing into this project in order to get what return I'm gonna get. That's the key thing. So let's just think about that while we're going through this conversation. But give yourself some grace. This is a really difficult industry that you're trying to operate in. And so I'm always continuously amazed at the resiliency of the folks that are doing it, managing it, running it. Not to mention this is a complex business with dozens or hundreds of employees. They're hard. It's hard. So anyway, so the cash flow. So let's do the same process. I want to go 90 seconds for everybody here. Let's kind of offer through what your thoughts are just in the cash flow cycle as it sits. We've kind of touched on a little bit, but let's just follow the same process and go through. And if Jack, you want to start, or Gary, you want to go? It doesn't matter. All right.
I might be the last one to sign, or the first one to sign an invoice or pay application. But with public companies, you know, we often have internal financing, so I'm curious to hear more about the construction loan aspect. But when I get a pay app, I verify the work's been done. It might take a day or two, and then if it's been done, then I turn it into accounts payable, and then it takes about a week. So different developers have I've heard of some people who want to hold on to it till the lien notices roll in. I don't think there are many of those, and I don't think that I know contractors don't want to work for those people. So any advantage, I can't pass that up in a competitive market. So we want to be the best client. So I want to pay as soon as I can. Like if the work's done, it's done. I can pay that out, and then from there it's a black box for me, right? It goes to accounting. It typically takes a week, 2 weeks. I can reasonably pay every time within 2 weeks, unless there's a mistake, or if you build for something that's not done, that's sufficiently costly to where I can't risk paying it early. So every little error, the human error, adds up and compounds into a week or 2 weeks, and then you get it, and then you get it. But all I care is if the work has been done, we just pay it as soon as we can.
I think for us, cash flow, obviously we're dependent upon general contractors, subcontract trade partners to get paid as an equipment rental business. And I think it could be argued that we're probably one of the last people that a trade partner thinks about paying, right? They've got payroll, they've got material costs, lease payments, et cetera. So we fall pretty far down that list from time to time. So what we've tried to do is have a lot of cash reserves as much as we can to try to float some of that. And then we've tried to be flexible and, kind of to the conversation that's been had, transparent with our customers as well, and say, instead of just mandating a 30-day net term, what realistically can you pay in, right? Is it 45 days? Is it 50? Is it 60? What is it? So that we can kind of start planning our cash flow as a business to understand what reserves we do need to make sure that we're in a place, to where we don't end up where we can't make our payments. And the other thing we've done is try to be flexible with our customers as well, as offer different products to them as far as equipment sales go. Maybe that would help us increase our cash, maybe help them with their balance sheet, whatnot. So we try to offer a few different products to where we're not solely reliant upon just the rental revenue to, for us to be whole every month.
I think a few things you can do proactively is setting up the schedule of values like we discussed earlier. see if there's ways to front load those as much as possible to get some of that cash up front. As well as, if there's materials with a long lead time or very pricey materials that you're going to need for the job, if you're able to bill for those maybe ahead of time, ahead of that schedule of values, get those on the job site, get those ready. Maybe even if you can't get them on the job site, if you can ship them into like an off-site storage. That way, when the job's ready for those materials, you can just pull them right out and get going on those. Those are kind of the two things that I can think of right now.
For us as a concrete supplier, we turn over a lot of material every day. So our rock, sand, cement bills are very large, and they come due at 30 days. So it's really important for us to partner with customers who are going to pay us, in 30 days or as close to it as possible. Because as Garrett mentioned earlier, the sand and gravel guys, the cement guys, 31 days you're cut off. No more rock, no more sand, no more concrete. So for us, we've had to diversify our customer base. We have to have a good mix of residential and commercial, municipal, all those things, because we know historically that the residential guys are going to pay quicker and the commercial guys are going to pay slower. So we've had to diversify ourselves, and some months we have to go 50-50, some months we have to do 70-30. We've got to be flexible, and we've got to be cognizant of our cash position, and that's how we've tried to mitigate it. And it's, to your point, Scott, it's not easy, but that's the steps we've taken to try to mitigate those things.
Cash is king, right?
Cash is king, baby.
In our world, it's typical of a project by contract. The trade partners turn their billings in before the 25th of the month, estimating through the end of the month. We take that, roll that into all the trade partners, and then our general requirements, general conditions fee for work completed, send that to our client. Typically, the architect is the one that certifies that the work in place is accurate based on what we're billing. Then the client stamps it, and then he sends it to his lender. Now, what happens in between that time period, I'm not real sure, but getting paid within net 30, which they're obligated by contract to do, hardly ever happens. I have one customer right now that makes it his mission in life to get me paid before 30 days. Sometimes it's even as quick as 2 weeks, and we appreciate that. The way we operate is when we get paid, we turn around that day and cut checks, sign them, send them out, so we don't hold money. But somebody mentioned municipal earlier. That is a net 30 payment, and I can tell you with a specific city that was mentioned earlier, they're more like net 90.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad.
That's a theme across the
And then I have another customer that negotiated that with me. They wanted 90, and we got it down to 65, so I was able to go to the trade partners before we bid the job and tell them what the terms were so they could plan for that. But I would like to know what happens between when I send it and when that actual check comes in the mail.
Scott, I think you and John hit on something. I heard a anecdote the other day sitting with a subcontractor, and I'm going to miss up the adjectives a little bit, but revenues, narcissism, income, sanity, and cash is king. So focusing on that income and that cash liquidity is paramount. Talking about the funding mechanisms, I think that, from the bank's perspective, we are doing exactly what you had mentioned, John. We're getting the invoices up from the developer who had gotten it from the general contractor, working with our contracted engineering report, going out, or engineering team, soliciting a report, making sure that the work that was stated was completed is done. Once that comes in, lien searches are done, making sure that there's no liens filed on the project. Once those are clear, then the bank submitting payment to the developer, and then it gets pushed down from there, is our understanding. And happy to touch on any other, sort of pieces along that throughout the discussion.
No. Still work. Playing musical mics. So I think we're going to talk more about how that process works and funding kind of on topic. But I just wanted to talk to you guys that kind of, a lot of you guys own your own businesses or starting out. Or one thing when we started Moss Utilities, just being open, my first 3-year projections were 4, 6, and 8 million. We did 22 million our first year, and then almost 40 our second year. And I had no idea. Yeah, you're like, oh yeah, that's great. Not great. because I had no plan for how to handle cash, no plan for how to finance that growth, no plan for what retainage was going to do. So I had no understanding of how all this worked and how, commercial work paid and how all the challenges it's going to bring, right? So the more you can understand about this process and, how it works, how retainage works, somehow we were able to figure it out. But I think one of the reasons Scott likes me is because I've been through all the bad lenders in the world. I've survived a merchant cash advance. I've survived a 20% line of credit. I've survived, all that stuff and, barely made it. So I've made all the mistakes when it comes to all this stuff. So understanding how these projects are financed, understanding how your business is financed, it's more important than actually knowing how to do the work. Because I don't know how to lay a stick of pipe to save my life. But I figured out everything else from just going through it and all the hard times. So, I'm curious to hear more about what takes so long in the process from, why we do a lot of commercial work, why it takes us from the time we submit an invoice. If it takes us 45 days to get paid, well, how long does it take me to pay a Brian or a Christian when they need 30-day terms and I'm getting paid in 45? Like, who's going to float that? How's that going to work? And how does that affect people down the chain from them? So if we can make that entire process better for everybody, quicker, what can we do? What can general contractors do? John paying on the same day he gets paid. There's GCs out there that's not the case. They pay only on Fridays because they don't want their accounting girl to cut checks more than one day a week. Stuff that costs you guys an extra week in the process. Or a bank, the inspector is just out on vacation and it costs you 2 weeks. Stuff like that. So I'm curious to hear more about that.
So I think one of the things, just to dive into or start the conversation off, is just around paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork. You got pay apps are complicated, schedules of values are complicated, lien releases, notices, just the paperwork. I think everybody in this room understands that. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about each individual's role and then how it ultimately gets to the bank and like where maybe some of the paperwork flaws are. That's something I think that's in everybody's control, is to spend a little diligence on your paperwork. If the paperwork's good, maybe we can talk about how that slows things down or can speed things up. Does anyone want to start?
I can start. So like I said, if we get a pay app or something and it appears that all the work is done, but maybe like a typo, you're off by $10 or something on a line item, and then so it's been submitted, it's approved, it gets, the accounts payable person gets confused. This, on the PO, this thing, there's not enough money here. It gets kicked back. That adds a week probably. Just so any tiny error like that, because now it has to come back to us and we're like, okay, well, it looks good. I'm not looking at every single line. I'm not going to the PO and saying, okay, there's $4,005. Okay, well, this is actually $4,010. So let me call them. Even if I do catch it on the front end instead of the accountant, then I have to go do that. It takes a couple days because there's a dozen other people asking stuff from us, right? So, and we're not just running one job. So any sort of error that requires more attention from us is a delay. And, it's a compounding delay because it takes me a day to figure it out. And then the analyst or the accountant has to then reprocess it and maybe void the last thing they did. So that adds a week for us, right? And then I guess we can solve problems relatively quickly. But if there's an error on it and it somehow isn't caught before it gets to accounting, it's going to go through that process, and instead of posting and getting paid, it's coming back to me as an error, and then we're starting over again. That's all I have to do with it.
And that's a pretty quick delay. Because we have a private client that does not have a lender involved. I'm tired of that thing. Thank you. That does not have a lender involved, and it will sit on their desk until it's due, which is 30 days from when I sent it, right? Well, if there's an error, we've already gone through that whole 30 days. They kick it back, and then the whole cycle is going to happen again. Next thing you know, I'm 60 days out. And then guess what? We screwed up again because nobody's perfect. Then we're 90 days out. And these guys are bankrolling the project. I mean, it's not fair.
when one of those instances starts, and I think this is where we can talk a little bit about this cycle and how it adds significant risk. When that happens, payroll for the subcontractor still has to get paid. Suppliers, other places can get cut off, and then that impacts other projects, other jobs. And what happens is that's where some of these different financing options that really are not congruent to construction world start to come into play. And when they do, they add more risk to a project than I promise any of the paperwork problems that you could possibly imagine are, right? And it's those merchant cash advances or others like that, or just maybe sometimes it might be borrowing the wrong money from the wrong friend. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial product, but it can be bad. And those are the reasons why everybody should care, because it's those other jobs and projects and the impact to them that can bleed over to everything else. So is there a certain set of instances that you see, John, from your perspective, that come up that aren't proper paperwork filled out, or is there a team you have to aggregate them first, I guess, right? So you probably see more issues with your aggregated amount of payouts, or you have more likelihood to see a pencil error or something like that, and then your team's putting on. Do you coach and counsel your team, or is there a certain amount of people on your team that have to do that? I mean, tell us about the process of owning it. If you own a general construction company and you're on jobs and there's multiple subs, like how do you manage that on your end? Is it a team? Is it a whole person? Is it one person?
Typically, it's the project manager. And so we do have trade partners that, they're not as sophisticated as some of the others, and we'll end up doing their pay applications for them just to help the process. And then the other challenge is lien releases. There's a wrong signature or a wrong date or something, some small oversight that it is a legal document, so it needs to be tight, and then getting that taken care of and having to, so that's but typically it falls on my project manager.
How much of it do you think is just sheer increased workload over the last couple of years and the growth, and
100%.
maybe just overlooking it instead of,
You're in a hurry.
getting in a hurry and you got too much work to do? There's a lot of that too.
The other thing in that too is if you compile 25 subs worth of paperwork, the bank will kick it back if one guy's is wrong, right? So one person gets their draw wrong, the bank is kicking the draw back into adding 10, 15 days to that cycle or whatever it is. So what can lenders do? What can GCs better do to mitigate that small stuff? Can we be more flexible on, how draws are processed, where it's not up to those little paperwork errors, and there's more, is there anything that we can done to make that process easier for the less, the smaller trade partners?
And some of the lenders and clients have some grace there, so it's like, hey, you messed up here, we'll let you make it up or take it out of the next one, and that helps too. Sorry, I think that was directed at you.
I would say so. First of all, once a project gets started, it's in the bank's interest to put the money out as quickly as possible, right? We're going to make money once the money is in the hands and on the job site. When it's sitting back and being, sitting in a construction loan as opposed to being funded, we're holding capital, not making interest. So we want to see this process move as quickly as possible. What the bank's doing throughout the funding cycle is just making sure that there's proper risk mitigation in place. And generally, our interests are very much aligned with the developers, right? We want to make sure that the project gets completed in orderly fashion and as close to budget as possible. An unfinished building is what we are most fearful of. We're petrified of having an unfinished building, because what do we do with that as collateral? If our loan's against that and the project fails, well, we're kind of up the creek with the developer, right? So everything we're doing is to try and make sure that that doesn't happen. And part of that's just ensuring that the work that is stated to be done has been done, and it's on plan compared to the project budget and timeline that was outlined. That said, in working with subcontractors and contractors, we've seen some really good processes that are in place, and generally the firms that have really good policies and procedures that start with the field that work their way to the office, those seem to be the most seamless, that come through with the least amount of mistakes, and the clients that are collecting their cash the fastest. So I'd say, I'm not trying to say that their banks doesn't hold or bear any responsibility in the flow of funds, but generally the stronger policies and procedures, the easier it is for us to get that draw request, get it approved, and get it funded. And same goes for change orders too. I think the quicker you can process change orders and have policies and procedures around those that come in a streamlined way to your finance team that then get pushed through the process, the smoother that goes from our side.
I came from an industry of corporate America and med device sales that was very slow at everything we did, hence leaving it. But one of the things I thought was interesting to come out of that is when we had to get something done and you had to have finance and HR and a million other departments sign off, we used to have a sign-off party. You know, someone would get lunch and bring it in and everyone would have to come, and it was basically a reason to get together to sign off on what everyone's signing off. Otherwise, it could take months to get person A, B, C, and D. Is it, with the amount of meetings done on a construction site, is it beneficial to include something like that in one of the meetings, or even having a special meeting for it?
Are you talking like, call it a pencil copy of the pay application that you sit down and go through it with your client?
Yeah, like today, we're all getting together, turning in your pay apps, and we're gonna make sure it's right together while we're here.
I mean, we do that typically, but I don't think it's typically on the construction side. It's my G702, which is my schedule of values, and we're just kind of talking through percent complete, but it won't have all the trade pay apps with it, lien releases and all that kind of stuff, so it's not ready to go. You're just trying to circumvent it the best you can.
Anyone see anything that anyone does maybe in particular better than others in terms of aggregating those?
I have a few clients that have found some different software to kind of help automate those types of items, especially like getting the invoices into AP, scanning those in directly. That way it's not sitting on a job site for a week. Several different products out there. I don't want to start pitching any of them, but if y'all have questions about those, I can give you a few references on those. But that's just one technique I've seen that's kind of sped it up a little bit. Just it's getting to accounting quicker for approval, getting to the PM quicker for approval, and it's not sitting in the job trailer for a week waiting for someone to actually pick it up and look at it.
And I agree, not being an infomercial here, so I'm not going to say who it is, but it got brought up to me the other day, and the way it was pitched is that it takes the human error out of it, and it handles all the lien releases and the paperwork that goes with it. The question is to Garrett, how do you feel about those programs?
Wow. Well, one of them is kind of a dirty word. I'm not going to say it, but I think they're great if they actually speed up the process. You know, I don't really know if they actually work or not. We still have to employ the same amount of billing people in our office to do the billing. Yet they have to learn that software. They have to figure out how to upload all of our waivers and everything to that software. So is that really any faster than getting it all together and emailing it over? You know, I don't know. And then who takes the cost of that software? There's one big name went out there with the subcontractors pay for most of it. And you add that up, and to me, it costs $4,000 a project. You look at my bottom line, I paid $150,000 in blank software fees to help somebody else's billing process. I could have hired 2 people for that. So there's other ones out there that the cost is a little bit more manageable, and the general contractor helps pay for and stuff like that. So I think there's a spot for technology, but if the processes don't get any better, you know, the technology doesn't really help as much.
Justin, have you seen any software that actually aggregates all the way up to the bank, or that the bank would consider, hey, we're going to put out X amount of millions of dollars for this project, and this would just make it real clean? We could see the risk. We could see it all happening in real time.
Not that I've seen.
I've seen it in some that go basically from GC to sub, but not past that.
Yeah, we haven't seen anything that I'm aware of.
Interesting. Okay. So on the in process of getting payment faster, is there anything that the bank has seen or has dictated or other banks have dictated that just seem to make it work smoother or faster? Or is there certain project types that if financing this kind of project, it's better or easier, or if financing this kind of project, it's worse?
I don't think there's a difference in type. It really comes down to organization and accuracy of information. And if the more organized the project is, the quicker it comes in, the cleaner it comes in, the sooner we can turn it around. I mean, we've also, there is a huge human element traditionally in the process, right? If you've got the invoices going or coming in, and it sits in someone before it gets to the banks, their payables department or invoicing department, and it person's out, and then it comes, and there's human error along the process. But as far as project type, that seems to move faster. I think we're indifferent to the type of project. It's really, is the information accurate, and does it make it to us quickly?
And are you relying primarily on the inspectors that you send out, or the architects, or where do you?
Yes. Generally, it's an independent third party that we are contracting to go and ensure that work that's being invoiced is complete.
And we specifically didn't put an architect on the panel for risk of safety and concerns for all. But, I think that I do see a lot often that architects can really slow things down in the payment process when they're a key integral part of that. Is there anything that, do you guys agree with that? Is there anyone would offer something different, or how you mitigate that or change that if that is true? Do we have to turn off the video at this point? All right, I guess that's the answer. Well, architects out there, you guys have some work to do. I'll speak for it because it doesn't matter to me. But so I can tell you what I see is architects are just slow to, if they're already having a complaint about what they're designing is hard to build, and then if that gets approved, then what they're inspecting that needs to be built is also difficult. So I think it's just something to consider. If I were to offer suggestions, I would point that out early in the process. Like, this is a really intricate building. This is going to be really difficult. We have, X and Y here. How are you guys going to approve these pay apps for what denotes, this is X% complete? Try to really get specific on that early then, if that's the case, if you have an architect involved, because they're going to be ambiguous. And part of what that comes from is they have a significant risk as well. They're approving that pay app. They have E&O insurance. If they screw it up, it's a deep enough pocket that everybody can go after. So that candidly is the problem. That's why it's slow and hard. And when things are slow and hard, people would rather not just jump on top of it. So that is part of it. It's not just that they don't know what they're doing. They actually know exactly what they're doing. They're just they have no one else to offload the risk to. So that's my 2 cents. Anyone else? Did that trigger anyone else to speak up, or no? But that's what it is. It's their risk, their policy. That's insurance policy. So, but if you can help them by making it really clear what is 20% complete versus 19 versus 30, that helps everyone along the chain and gives some specifics. When it's ambiguous, is where everybody can start to punch holes in it, and you can have attorneys, make their way. So.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things maybe I glossed over, but probably worth noting, is making sure you have qualified and credentialed people for the project that you're doing, right? So if you're going to have a large, complex building, make sure that the people that are working that know that, can speak to that, and that the bank knows that we have a teams that go in and assign that work out, but it doesn't hurt to double check and make sure that the assigned engineers or architects that are going in and verifying the work are qualified to verify that work, and that's within their general scope of what they do daily, and not that they're somewhere in some way a fish out of water in what they're looking at.
Can I ask a question on that? So from an underwriting standpoint on a project, there are a lot of projects getting built out there where maybe it costs $400 to get a general contractor certificate in Texas with a new GC that doesn't have any credentials or anything. So how does a bank, I'm sure your bank doesn't do this, but other banks, how do you get them better about underwriting the general contractor, and do they look at underwriting any of the subcontractors on a project? Do they go that far to say, You know, we've talked about not picking the low bid every time or picking qualified trade partners, but some of the bigger GCs use, you know, pre-qualification, and they really look at subcontractors' financials, and they do a good job of that, right? But you see a lot of projects get built where it seems like there's no underwriting of the actual people on the site doing the work.
Yeah, so that piece is meaningful, back to that character and integrity, reputation, underwrite. Certainly something we look at, and actually, you know, not all banks are very interested in the construction and engineering space for all of the reasons that we've talked about, right? Like the project billing, the interim invoicing, all of the delayed payments, those types of cash flow cycles generally are not very predictable and underwritable, and so banks aren't always great at underwriting to this space. I think we're a little different in that because we do that. Our commercial real estate team, who are generally partnering with the developers of the world, will reference check general contractors, and depending on the scope, scale, and complexity of the project, try and even dig deeper. Do we know who the subs are that are showing up here? I can't tell you that it's happening on every single job, but certainly we're doing the best we can to exhaust our networks to learn as much as we can about individual projects. And that leads to that when there is that communication piece that's going on, there is cost escalation, there is inflation, there is interest rate pressures. That's where that really gets important, right? When things are going great, the banks none the wiser to a poor subcontractor or something that's not going to plan or might not go to plan. When things do kind of hit a bump in the road, that's when knowing those parties, when the bank can lean in and say, we can increase our contingency, or we can increase some of our loan to value because we know the people here, we've done work with them, we've seen them, we've worked with the general contractor, we know the developers worked with them 5 times, and this is the result of all 5 of those instances. So it certainly is a meaningful part when things require more communication.
I've spoken to some bankers that also told us that there's certain trades they do care about depending on certain buildings. They care about the structural on a 20, you know, they want to know who's doing the steel, right? Or who's doing the concrete, who's doing the engineering. They probably don't care so much about the landscaping, right? But they do care about certain scopes. If it's a giant, you know, 10-story curtain wall and no one's ever done it before, they want to know where the glass is coming from, who's doing the work and labor. So there are certain scopes to that where you can certainly utilize you can leverage your talents, or you can also make sure to find a way to, you know, add some advantage to yourself.
I'd say oftentimes too, a lot of that information flows through the developer, right? So they're the ones that are going to come to us and say, here's our list of all of our partners on this project, and here's their resumes, and here's some of their portfolio of work. And so that's generally where we're getting that information to start.
And a lot of times, some of the banks them, so they know more than you might know, and they might not. I don't know how you share that. That could be an uncomfortable position, but sometimes those banks know a lot about. They might be putting somebody in a really precarious situation for some other projects they're on, so it might be a tool to use. Hey, these are the people we're going to use. Do you have any issues with them?
Yes, absolutely.
Anyone have any questions or anything that we haven't talked about that you want to touch on before we transition topics? And we're getting close to our networking happy hour time. Go ahead, Walter.
So, I mean, from my opinion, I've been on all 3 sides, and I think there needs to be a little bit of education going up. You know, you talk about the developer, but you have that piece where you have the architect and the owner. Everybody wants their building done in this certain amount of time, but they don't want to pay, you know, to have it done as quickly as they want it built. I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, we talk about relationships with our suppliers and our contractors, and make sure the contractors have that good relationship with the architect, that they're educating them that, hey, you need to come out and review this, you come out hopefully on owners meetings and things of that nature, and make sure they understand that, hey, you want these guys to do a good job, if you want them to supply all of this labor, you need to make sure that you're paying on time as well. And so I think, you know, from the subcontractor standpoint, I have a great relationship with a lot of the GCs. When I was on the GC side, I had a lot of good relationships with subcontractors, but I did recognize that, it's our, it's the job of the contractor, and myself, to, hey, educate that architect and let them understand that, hey, you are impacting the job, your subs on the job building it, hey, they are out 60 days. So they are actually funding the job, for you before you actually pay them. I mean, I think a lot of architects, they understand that, some don't care, and so somehow we got to do a better job of changing that culture that has already been established for a very long time, that this is acceptable. And once we change that, maybe we can change how we think about things.
I'll add to that and grab a question. I'll say that from mobilization funding perspective, we care a lot about the money on the project, where it's coming from and who's involved. One thing we do look at is if the architects are the ones approving invoices, we add, that's a definite box check in our underwriting and adds significant risk to the project from our perspective, because it delays payment almost 100% of the time. And if so, that's going to add a lot of risk to the subcontractor and obviously everything else we just talked about. So from someone who's putting actual money out on the job ahead of time based on performance, we know that's a performance risk, just it is. And so what Walter's stating and what you guys have talked about is real. So for the perspective of the banks and GCs, if that's something that's new, it's real. I can attest to that. I don't remember how much that last thing cost us, but it was a lot. Do you have a question?
Can I answer him real quick? Just one thing. I think what you were trying to say is that the culture of it's somebody else's problem has to stop, right? That it's a culture mindset that we all need to be worried about how to get paid faster. When John has a client that pays him in 2 weeks, guess what? Everybody wants to go work for that guy. When Jack can pay in a week, guess what? I mean, we're gonna love working for Jack, right? So having that culture of it's not my problem, it's not my cash flow problem, it's somebody else's problem. That's where that comes from. And if that improves from all stakeholders, that'll only get better.
Yeah, I think bringing the architect into the pre-construction meetings, let them know what role they're going to play and how it impacts. If they don't do this or do that, they probably aren't aware of it. I don't think they're doing it on purpose, but if they're aware of it, they'll do something different with it.
I think the hard bid process, everybody wants that cheap price and they're used to that part of the process. And so we got a GMP process where we're working as a team to establish that early on. In some cases, you'll have general contractors, great trade partners in, and so you all are, again, one cohesive team for the betterment of that particular project. So, hey, I pay on time. Hey, I'm going to get a better project. I'm going to get better trade partners bidding that project at better prices.
Yeah, focusing on performance. Go ahead, sir.
I think another thing the elephant in the room that's not being addressed is legislation. Big laws in Texas need to change. There's a few things that need to change altogether. I used to work in Arizona. Arizona, at 60 days of not payment is criminal. And it's not a civil matter. We need to address that. It's been the elephant in the room for years. And the way it works is you have to leave the job before you need to go on the job. You go on the job with leave funds. So you already have that protection. So once that job starts, you're not even going to issue a contract with the general contractor unless you already. Once that's filed, you go to work. You're paid between 30 and 45 days on the contract. That is from developer down. So trade partners are on joint jets with suppliers in Arizona. Everyone's bonded in the state of Arizona. You have to carry bond in the state of Arizona. Everybody is licensed. That is the biggest thing too. We were talking about a minute ago, Barry. I think we should, as a trade industry, we're all sitting here together. I think as an industry, we all should look at each other and go, I think we should pursue this licensing issue because, and for the fact too, because they're going to see these are licensed contractors. The state of Texas agrees that they're licensed within their trade. And we pursue that avenue. I think a lot of the hiccups we're talking about right now will go away because you might be on a job with 8 or 10 other subs, and 8 of the 10 of them are awesome subs. And you got the one guy that is newer to the game, that's built the industry, and he screws up the draw that we were just talking about earlier. And all of a sudden, we're all sitting there going, I'm going on 90 days here, guys, what's going on? It's a good client. You don't want to screw up the relationship. But at the end of the day, I think it's little things like that that can really change the whole game of the game. But it's not being addressed.
Well, in the state of Florida, the Associated Building Contractors, ABC, do a really good job with legislation. In Tallahassee, I think there's a pretty good group of here in Texas also. And those would be good places to start. They can aggregate change pretty well. I don't know how many of you guys are members of those communities and subscribe to it, but that would be a good place that I've seen success to handle those types of legislative matters in states.
I mean, it's just an idea of it's something that I witnessed firsthand working out there at Project Manager. We didn't have to send emails.
All right. Anybody? Sure.
Just to tie the two together, I think talking about the schedule of values early on that we discussed, us as a developer, I love to see that schedule of values early on with contracts as part of it as the vendor, because in the future, when we do submit our costs to the bank, we have our G7 routine that's just generalized because we want to make it quick and easy. I've had plenty of our laws turned back where I can go back to those schedule of values and say, okay, here's more specific information, here's the itemized quantities, all that information that I can provide without spending a lot of time on my effort, that we as trade partners and owner developers, GC, we have done that on the front end. And I've been successful in many times with our vendors push back and say, hey, I get it, you have a third-party representative, so do we, here's the argument, and, very quick turnaround in a day or two, and it doesn't go that way. And so I think it is up to us as the GC or the developer to, process those schedules of values and look at them carefully, whether it's project manager level or whoever it goes to above, so that we can prevent some of that from even getting to that extent. And that's where I think some of that partnership can play together. Hey, let's see a little bit of your back end, if you will. We've done enough projects together that we're comfortable with this, and let's move forward as a partnership, holding hands, and be more transparent with the community.
Yeah. I think it's a great point.
Even when you fill out all the proper paperwork, get it submitted on time, you're still only receiving about 90% of the work. I know it seems like, it gets pushed all over. Detail just contractors all over the place. A year later,
So just so everyone can hear, you're talking about retainage. If we getting paid 90%, it makes it even harder. If you're first on the job, it's even more difficult, and just kind of factoring those items in.
or maybe it be broke out based on scopes, underground scopes, and hey,
Like releasing the retainage sooner, you mean, until the end?
we're done, it's been accepted.
Justin, that'd be a good question for you. What is does the bank consider who's on site first and who's done with their scope as to when you can release retainage?
Yeah, so the specific construction projects that I finance personally are outside of the state of Texas. So I don't know what the rules are in Texas, but generally, I don't care, right? I do require some retainage, but I don't care where that comes from.
Like which scope it is.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
I'm going to say something really unorthodox here. I understand the philosophy behind retainage. It's to keep everybody's attention, right? If something happens, you can get them back because 10% is enough of a chunk of money. It means something, right? To a trade partner, that could be their full fee. And somebody like Garrett's got to come out and throw all the pipe in the ground. And he's got to wait 9 months until he gets his 10% retainage. Well, that's his fee that he doesn't get. Has anybody ever explored cutting out retainage on materials, maybe? Only? Because I know in our contracts, I try to negotiate early release retainage for Garrett. Doesn't always happen. Try to do the same thing with the earthwork guys. I try to do the same thing with structural steel because those are materials hitting the job site. I only hold 10% retainage on the erector of the steel. But once the steel hits the job site, I try to get that 10% released. I don't know. It's just a thought. Maybe erroneous as heck, but thought I'd throw it out there.
I actually think that's a good idea because, for example, if there's a problem and joint checks go to supplier or contractor, the supplier's getting paid in full every time. They're not taking retainage. So, you know, if you think about the impact of that, if you got to just take $1 million job and retainage is 10%, but $500,000 and $400,000 of that is material, well, now that profit's now down $40,000 in terms of cash flow, which is even more impactful because 10% of the 400 grand went out the door. So the margin and the cash flow and all the things we just discussed a little bit ago is even less. So, and some may say, well, I lose my markup in the material. Maybe you do. Maybe the markup isn't as much as it is. Maybe you move. That's where schedule of value is. Where is your profit? Is it in somewhere or is it not? I talked to some of our clients about why not just put your profit as a line item and, you know, not get cute, you know, like, hey, I'm gonna make 20% on the show. I'm gonna make 25. Now, you're gonna have some GCs that probably won't work with you, right? But you might find some that do, because I promise you, there's plenty that think subs are making 40 and 50% or more or less. They don't know, and so they'd be happy to know you're making 20 and that's it, and let's figure out how to help you make it. Assuming the numbers are right, top numbers right too. Yeah. I think if it's at the owner's level, it can make a definite impact. I think if it stops at the GC, you're going to still have impact. You're going to still have problems in terms of software. All right, we'll go one more question here, and then I'm going to go through a couple things and keep everybody let do their networking. Go for it, Benny.
I got a question for you. Is there a way to like filter this general contractors? Like in our career, we found out the hard way. You know, like, is there a way to like check up on like just like to ask us for the pre-qual, you know, form? Could we do that to the general contractor? Like, for example, like this real estate in 2 weeks, right? Or basically, is there a way to do some research on these guys before we go into business?
So there's a couple different avenues you can use. Join networks like ASA, you know, Texo, stuff like that have programs designed to rate general contractors kind of behind closed doors. That stuff happens where people could talk about payment issues, or somebody brings up a GC's name and they go, they're not paying, here's why. So that's a good network. I'd also use your references from your attorney. Like, we've got a really good construction attorney who represents only subcontractors, and he's worked with all the GCs out there. So it's real quick to go, hey, a new GC I'm working with, how are they? Boom, here's their issue, here's their contract, here's, you know, use other professionals outside you guys too. Because I'm like you, when I got started, I worked for some bad customers and really had to learn hard who not to work for. And there's better ways to go about it than you know, learning the hard way every time, right? So
Insurance brokers. Your insurance broker.
insurance, John's saying insurance guys are another good, you know, referral to see who's, or bonding guys, or, you know, they kind of know where problems are, right? You know which GCs are struggling, and kind of this. So you want to add anything? Yeah.
All right, so we'll spend a couple minutes. I just want to talk a little bit about the just different types of construction financing, so everybody can kind of have some awareness to it, specifically for the performance-based trades, as well as general contractors that are self-performing certain scopes. So there's a stigma out there about factoring in construction, and they probably, how many people here, raise their hands, know what factoring is? All right, good, everybody knows. So factoring, in short, if anyone doesn't know, it's basically buying your invoice. You've invoiced it, and it shortens the gap between when your customer pays you. What they're doing in factoring is taking the credit risk, meaning are they able to pay, and they're taking it off of you individually and putting it on your customer. Obviously, you can see why a general contractor wouldn't want to deal with that, right? Or a developer. Because it directly impacts and hurts the actual contractual relationship they have with you. So that's a problem. Some of the other financing options out there that people can use, and again, everyone in this panel and every type of business, there's financing. There are banks, there's traditional finance. You need financing to be able to execute work regardless of the industry you're in. Give yourself some grace because, again, as big as this industry is and as difficult as it is to manage for the reasons we talked about using my restaurant example, it's equally difficult because the banks don't want to finance the trades. They don't necessarily want to finance construction. They don't necessarily want to finance all types of projects either. So it has more risk. So you have to find the banks that understand it and do a good job at it and figure out where they are and they know how to assess the right pieces, so that you can get yourselves traditional lines of credit or asset-backed lines where they're using your receivables, but they're counting on you and your performance capabilities to give you some access to cash to help you run your business for all the reasons we talked about. Obviously, the other way a lot of folks use is they finance it with other jobs. That's a real bad thing to do. Sometimes it's people say, oh, I have to, what am I supposed to do? I get it. But it causes other problems and concerns, and again, I call it just kind of punting the problem down the road. The problem you're dealing with at this moment, you're just pushing away 2 weeks or a month. So those are things you want to try to have the tough conversations early, assess these things early so you don't have to do those kinds of things, okay? Third would be factoring, okay? Factoring is really tough to use. There are some construction factors out there that frankly probably do it okay. And if you can find the right GC and you can find the right trade partners, it can certainly work. And then there's alternatives. Mobilization funding is one of those. Material financing companies like Build or even Level Set, some of you may be aware of. How many people are aware of those different forms? Build, okay. So depending on what you use and what you're using it for, everyone has the right application. So if you're using Build or Level Set, for example, and you're buying only material and you're really only bridging a gap of 30 days, works great. If you try to extend it out to 120, but you get paid in 60, you're now causing real problems for yourself, the performance, and the project, because now you're not paying that back with the actual monies from the project. These are things that not everyone will tell you or you'll understand, but I point it out to you because it can be a problem. So you want to be smart with how you're using it and use it as it's designed. Mobilization funding is very similar to some of a blend of all of them. We care about the receivables, we care about the project. We want to make sure that our cash you can have access to before you ever get to an invoice, so you can use it for labor and material. But we are building that project cash flow tool out in advance so that you can have all this information before you ever set foot on a project to arm yourself with, hey, I'm going to have a hard time here up front, week 10, because this is when my first material's due. Can I get this material on the job in advance? And if so, if I don't have to borrow money for this material, I can actually execute this job better. That's the real difference between what we're doing is that cash flow tool, and then showing you where you can fill in the gaps so you know, like that example I gave you with the HVAC contractor. Hey, if you move your material bill around, you only need $600,000 for your 35% margin job instead of $1.8 million, right? And so you can have those conversations. And again, I'm always incredibly impressed when given the information and empowered. Everyone in this room, you guys make great decisions. You know what levers to pull. You know who to go talk to. It's just the limited information oftentimes that is either from lack of a conversation or in the math, it's always that project cash flow tool. You have a great bid and you have the schedule, but you don't really know how much of that cost is going to go out and when as compared to when you're receiving the money. So anybody want to add anything here on the panel? Some last words? No. Well, Well, I want to say thank you to everybody. I thought this was exactly what we envisioned. Some cases it was a little less, in many cases it was even more. Garrett, thank you again for helping put this together with us. And all the panelists, you guys are awesome. Candidly, this went exactly how I wanted. I want everyone here and everyone on the video to be able to see these kind of conversations being had in a constructive manner, and everyone recognize them, everyone wants to solve them, and this should be emulated across any industry, city, construction project. It can be done. So speak up, talk about it. Don't be intimidated. Don't be afraid. You're not alone. Those are all common themes that I think we've talked about today. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.